had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday again, and you know what that means. Time for another edition of Cello Chat. This time with my special guest, Zach Sweet. Zachary, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you, Benjamin?
I'm doing wonderfully, thanks. So I was noting that on LinkedIn, you and I have 29 mutual connections, even though we've never met.
Yes.
There are quite a few people I have met many times with whom I have fewer connections than that. So it's just kind of like one of those, what's the story about the musical world being a small one?
Even smaller these days, I think, with social media and the like. It's quite small, but it's really lovely to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. And so can you tell your story? How did you get started, not just in music, but with this wonderful instrument, the cello, and your path to where you are today?
Yeah, it's. I think the most fascinating thing about being musicians is that everyone seems to have a different path, and so mine began as the son of a rather famous opera singer. Her name is Sharon Sweet, and she got her career started in 1986 when I was 5, and we moved to Germany. I grew up in Berlin, Germany, and my mom was singing with the Berliner Staatsoper in Dresden, and had a pretty a very successful career, and that immediately affected my perception of music as a profession, but also it really informed the impact that music could have on a life. So I was really moved as to music as a young person, and I think for the next 40 years, kind of tried to get back to that place of preserving that impact that music can have in personal lives and then also professionally. But more on that later. How I started on the cello is sort of, depends on who you ask. I remember it, as so many children probably tell the story of it being forced on them, while my mother strongly remembers it being a choice. Either way, I got a cello when I was 8, and I started studying with Nella Hunkins, who was of the Berlin Philharmonic at the time, formerly of the Cleveland Orchestra. And I was kind of cold on the cello at first. I didn't take to it. I didn't really take to it for a while until about high school. And I had always grown up singing, and my dad's a minister, and we grew up singing in the church choir and that sort of thing. And I was sort of more drawn to singing and acting in high school, though I did continue with cello. But there was sort of like transcendence, I don't know, in high school, where I went to Interlochen and Indiana String Academy and just sort of started like veering in that direction, and I would say actively started participating in a life of cello around sophomore, junior year in high school. And then miraculously got into the Eastman School of Music. I say miraculously because Alan Harris was my teacher at the time and became full-time at Eastman. And, we all have these stories of like luck or right time and right place, but he, took a full studio of people at the time. And so I was one of the lucky 9 freshmen that he took that year. And then sort of, just continued my master's at Eastman. And it wasn't until after my master's degree that my life really started to like take shape. I would say I'm sure we all have these adolescent phases of like not really sure what you're doing, taking a slew of auditions, bopping around, trying to see where I fit into this piece of the puzzle. And it was an accident that I fell into the School for Strings, which is a Suzuki-based string school in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. And it was on a recommendation to me by a dear friend of mine. that I pursue this, and I had no idea at the time. I mean, I knew what Suzuki was, but I had never taught a student before. I had never seen the literature of the Suzuki curriculum, and that was transformative. My first cello teacher trainer was Pam Davenport. And, you know, she's one person who's had a really tremendous effect on numbers of people. And I am among those people that was really transformed. And that sort of began a new life for me, a new path forward, where I felt like, you know, the creativity and the desire to make a life of music and to work within this sort of creative space of working with young children can sort of merge together and carve a path forward. And that was in 2007, and here we are in 2023. And I'm currently a teacher trainer for the Suzuki Association of the Americas. I play with Kyuga Chamber Orchestra, and which is a professional orchestra in Ithaca, and then a new music Society for New Music in Syracuse, which is my newest adventure. New music has been about 6 years of a focal point for my playing, and so it's been a wild ride for 42 years.
That's a real fun one, though. So, what were some of your main takeaways from Alan Harris's teaching approach?
Wow, Alan Harris. I learned so much from him. I learned how to swing my right arm, which if there are any of Harris students out there, they'll know exactly what that means, both functionally and sort of a caricature. There was sort of a constant saying he had. I think more seriously, discipline. He was among the most knowledgeable and hardworking, and still is, though he's retired from Eastman recently. He is still passionate and curious, and it is his life. You know, he commits a lot of himself to the endeavor of music, and that was really inspiring. And so that, and then in addition, I would say his passion for music. You know, he is one of the most passionate people I've ever met about music, and that has a strong magnetism for young people who want this. And yeah, he was a tremendous impact for me. And physical health. That's pretty much all we worked on. I was a pretty rough player, rough around the edges and really tight, wound up. And so we spent 7 years sort of unwinding me a little bit.
Wow. Well, based on your online materials, your website, for example, it doesn't seem like you necessarily needed to study with somebody who had the additional passion for music. You come across as somebody who, really lives it, really embodies it. And I imagine, based on just even a lot of your photos with your students, look like you're having a blast. All of you are having a lot of fun. And I mean, is one of the strong attractions for teaching youngsters the fact that they don't have, I mean, maybe I should put it in the positive, they have such a burning flame for the things that interest them. You know what I mean? And it's not that, oh, well, but I have to be cool and I have to kind of tamp this down. You can just be whole hog. Wow, this next Suzuki piece is my favorite thing ever. That passion is just raw.
Yeah, and I think honesty as well. I think because sometimes it's not passion. I'd say passion really is time tested. Are you passionate about something? Can you do it over the next 20 years? And but there's an excitement, there's a novelty, there's a joy of learning, and I think that really transcends to me through children. that curiosity and joy are inherent. I mean, we are in the right circumstances naturally curious and joyous, and children learn through play. And why do we lose that along the way, and how do we reclaim that in a way to project that in our own lives? How do we remain curious? How do we remain joyous? I'll let you know if I ever find the answer. But children, for sure, keep it interesting as well. I've over the past 17 years of teaching, I don't think I've ever taught the same student, and it's always a creative process. As I desire to think that there's sort of a formula of you do this and then you do this, and after all this happens. And I have found that not to be the case, that a linear thinking creates a path forward, but we often jettison in and out of that path, and often then scaffold other ways around that one thing. And it's always different. And I think that's, for me, as someone who has in the past and as a child got so bored so quickly, is so interesting to me to always be working with in being so familiar with something, yet needing to be creative in the moment, to be spontaneous and try things out, experiment. So yeah, children are a blast, and they're so curious to be around.
Yes. Well, okay, so another thing that I mentioned to you before was that I appreciate how it really comes across that you believe Suzuki's thing about every child can. And I mean, I don't know if you've encountered this as well, but I have that approach. I have that approach, whether it's with cello or for example, in ear training classes. And I've actually encountered professional teachers sometimes who like, really, you think everybody you know what I mean? Who clearly don't believe that. And I'm wondering if part of maybe what makes a difference is you sound totally willing, if you have all of this kind of lineup of formulas, and you try this one, oh, maybe it's this type of person, maybe it's this type of person. But if you have a totally non-linear, outside the box approach, it really can help you, with the students that seem like at first maybe, oh, this student, some people might say, isn't teachable. And if you just don't give up and you stay curious about finding that solution, you can always just broaden your perspective as a teacher as to what it is to get to each individual.
I think that's right. And Suzuki Sensei was, I think it might be a controversial opinion, but I'll say it anyway. But I think his most important contribution to the world was that every child can. That music is not an exclusive endeavor. That music is something inherent that we all are born with. Music predates verbal syntax, and it's not something. I think it's sort of a modern take that music is sort of an elite field, and it certainly is an elite field today. We can't deny that. But in the beginning, I think music is just about learning, and the importance of using music as an education model for children, I think is essential. And the fact that it's not a core curriculum, it just boggles my mind. It seems to be that more of an important subject in like pre-K and kindergarten, but after that it just seems to sort of dwindle, and I can't seem to figure out why. So every child can, but I think it really depends on what we're talking about. So when I'm talking about is, I think that music that all children should have access to music, that the space of music should be available to everyone, regardless of wealth or creed or race or whatever, that there should be a musical space for everyone. I don't think that professional musicianship is for everyone. Sometimes I doubt if it's for me because it's not an easy life. And it takes, these days, it seems to take years of, unless you're a superstar, it seems to take a lot of scaffolding towards a path that is stable and creatively exciting. And so every child can, but not everyone should be a professional.
All right. So the topic of motivation. Again, it sounds like you have it baked into your approach in a number of ways, but are there any just kind of pithy aspects of your approach, your go-tos, when you feel like a particular student at this point in their lives is just needing a little bit of help figuring out how to get that cello out and keep doing what they need to do to get where they want to go?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot with my college students. And my best advice is to don't think about it. The second you think about practicing, should I practice? That question automatically begets a slew of, oh, I'll do it later. I don't need to do it. You know what I mean? Like the second it becomes a negotiation, it's never going to happen. And so if the importance of practice is there, if you want to practice and you know it needs to happen, or maybe you don't want to, but you know it has to happen for juries are coming up and whatever, that it has to be an automation, that you just have to go in the practice room, unpack. But it's interesting how difficult it is to not think, negotiate within yourself around something like that. I would put it in the context of like going to the gym or something like, or something that seems optional, though it has many thousands of health benefits. Seems to be the motivation to do something like that. Seems to be something that people struggle with, and so that's my first thing is my encouragement of don't think about it, just do it. And you don't have to have a plan when you get in there. You just have to be in there, and then the plan matters. But if you're not getting into the practice room, there's no plan that matters. And so yeah, don't think about it. And then once you're there, I think start with, what do you want to do? And maybe it's not something you've been assigned. Maybe it's something that is sort of a secret project. I was learning, for example, Elgar Concerto well before it was assigned, and I didn't tell my teacher. And so what would you want to do right now? There's always something, and maybe it's just sit there and I don't know, practice your orchestra music because it's in front of you or something. So fine, start there. And then, the quality of practicing starts to matter a little bit more.
All right, excellent. So another thing you mention in your teaching philosophy is the priority you place on teaching your students to be versatile. So, which I think is great. But how do you go about doing that? How do you try to encourage versatility in your students?
It depends on what age we're talking about. And it seems to be a little bit easier in college. At the college level, I encourage my students to find composer friends that are always in need of cellists or for whatever they're composing, and just to make relationships and perform new music, or to every semester we tend to play a studio piece, and this last year it was Variations by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and so it's something that has not been heard a lot and is unfamiliar to everyone, and that seems a little bit easier because they're there to learn, and they're sort of ready to be guided. But I think it's for early education, it takes a little bit of more digging. My experience with being versatile and playing world musics or improvisation or something like that, stems from a music together background. At the same time that I was doing Suzuki, I was also training in music together, which has a really strong curriculum in world and cultural music and world musics and jazz. I mean, Ken Gilmartin was a jazz pianist in addition to a Del Croce, teacher, and it's a really fascinating blend of all these different worlds. And so in our group classes, for example, in our Suzuki school here in Ithaca, every weekend we're improvising. We're talking about this semester we're breaking down pop music, and so we're taking favorite pop songs or maybe not unknown pop songs and dissecting them and to their chord structure and their rhythm and how do we play with this actually, I don't think I'm sad to say it, but one of them is a Taylor Swift song, and talk about motivation for a 12-year-old person who's living in today's world. It's hard to escape Taylor Swift. So that's what another motivator is, to bridge these worlds of my geekiness and your love of Taylor Swift. And I think there's a Venn diagram there somewhere.
That's cool. So how I'm just kind of curious, pre Suzuki and post Suzuki, how do you feel that the Suzuki approach, the Suzuki method, informs your teaching, even if you're teaching like a college student or something where it's not overtly Suzuki?
Yeah. Before Suzuki, it's hard to say because I think I can answer that question a little bit better as a current teacher, because as you said, I mean, I don't use the Suzuki method with my college students. But I think at the base of what Shinichi Suzuki offered is just really smart teaching. Your ability to break things down into small bits, your ability to diagnose a musical problem. Is it a playing problem? Is it a rhythm problem? Is it this? What is the ear training like? What is the rhythm training like? Being able to dissect something is both curious, but also really entertaining. Like, to just try to get to the bottom of something. I forget who told this to me once, but like, everything is impossible until it isn't, right? Like, so if I sat down to play Prokofiev Symphony Concertant, it would be absolutely impossible for me right now. But if given enough time of dissecting something, it slowly becomes more possible. So there's no such thing as hard. It's just either possible or impossible at the moment. And I said it, I'm answering it this way because I think I maybe taught one or two people before I was a Suzuki teacher. So Suzuki, it's hard to separate myself from Suzuki's philosophy because so much of myself as a teacher began within the Suzuki method. But I do have a few instances in my mind. For instance, when I was in Aspen, I was asked to teach a student for the summer because I was there. And I remember having something like an hour-long lesson with this poor 10-year-old kid. And I think for an hour, we just sat there with a metronome. And I read, if that one kid is listening, I'm so sorry. I was such a bad teacher at the time. How boring was that lesson? Anyway, I'm sure there's a few ruined kids out there, but.
So another thing that struck me from your online performances, and then reading that you play on a willow cello. I'm just kind of curious there because some of my students over the years have just the first time that they find out, okay, maple and spruce is by far the most common combination, but it's not the only one. How did you come to fall in love with a willow cello?
The willow cello was another happenstance for me. It's sort of like getting into Eastman. It's sort of this thing I stumbled into with a little bit of effort, but it's something that I could not have like orchestrated on my own. So Evangeline Benedetti, who is a former member of the New York Philharmonic, took me around when she learned that we were that I was in the looking for a new cello. This is probably 2001, my sophomore year in college, and she took me around to all the shops. So immediately I had access to people that I probably would not have had access to otherwise. And she took me to Jim McCain, who was at the time living in New York City, and we tried several of his cellos, and this was one that I played, and for some reason fell in love with it. I think it was a little bit of predetermination in that I had no knowledge of the instrument before I picked it. So I am lucky, because what ended up happening is that the instrument, which also was made in 2001, continued to open up over the next 22 years. It's 22 years old now. And a good new cello is just going to continue to deepen in sound. And Jim McCain was really lovely to me and encouraged me to, I think he literally said, beat the heck out of it, because it just needs to live a little bit so that it can evolve and open up. And I'm lucky that it did just that. It seems to keep on getting more deep, more singy, and yeah, it has a nice projection too. It's a pretty loud instrument. Sometimes I have to be pretty careful.
As a cellist, I'd rather have that problem of tamping it down than I get this cello to project.
What's interesting too is it's called the willow cello because this was Jim's first prototype in willow. It was his first foray rather into using willow as a wood, and I think he exclusively uses willow now for his cellos. Carter Bray plays one. There are several other cellos in the New York Philharmonic, and so he's really loved working with it. Not to speak for him, but I can report that it is something that he continues to work in. It has had really good results.
Interesting. That's great. Yeah, I love trying out new cellos every time I go to ASTA, for example, which is this year in conjunction with the Suzuki finally meeting. I'm very excited about that.
Me as well.
It's always interesting, the things that sometimes you think this is an aspect of the cello. No, it's an aspect of the way your cello responds,
And it's interesting that this becomes a full circle moment. When I bought this instrument as a sophomore in college, Alan was really, I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but he was unrelenting in sharing with me that I was going to have to work really hard to sound good on this instrument, because it seemed to exacerbate some of my weaknesses. So my weaknesses was that I was a really muscular cellist, and this is a really sensitive cello. So the more pressure I put into it, the less it responds. Huh. So it encouraged a sensitivity, but as you know, 4 years of an undergrad is really hard to create a physical sensitivity that is going to respond for a senior recital or something. And so it was a marriage of need at the time. It provided what I didn't have but needed in the future, and it just took time to. So I learned a lot from playing on this instrument, but I didn't sound great on this instrument for a long time. It took a while of backing off, and it was exactly the thing I needed at the worst time.
That's very interesting. All right, what's coming down the pike in what's left of 2023 or 2024 spring academic year?
Yeah. So I play with Society for New Music, and every year we go on tour with something called the Vision of Sound, which is a new music festival that bridges new composition, new dance, and new musicians. So new music, musicians, and it's we're doing shows in Syracuse and Rochester. So that's really I'm really looking forward to that. And then my piano trio, the Nazareth Piano Trio, is giving a recital. We're doing music by Dvorak, Amy Beach, and Jesse Montgomery. And then I get to do some workshops. I'm doing a workshop in Dallas. I'm doing some stuff in Utah later this summer, and it's going to be a really good time. All that would be up on my website later when I get around to it.
Sounds fun. Sounds great fun. All right. Well, thanks so much, Zachary. It's been real fascinating. Just kind of getting to know you beyond the name and the connections on online. And I know that everything you said is going to be great fodder for people to think about when they're practicing all week until next Friday's Cello Chat. So we'll see you then, everybody. You had me at cello, cello, you had